Hello everyone and welcome back to English Spark, the place where you can improve your English through inspiring and meaningful stories. Today's story follows the incredible journey of a young man who makes one life-changing decision: to build his fortune from absolutely nothing. With no money, no connections, and no special opportunities, he chooses to rely only on discipline, hard work, and determination. Along the way, he will face failure, rejection, sacrifice, and unexpected opportunities that will test his character and shape his future. If you're ready to improve your English while enjoying an inspiring story filled with valuable life lessons, sit back, relax, and let's begin. Jason Carter had never imagined that the worst day of his life would also become the most important one. At the age of 25, he lived in a tiny apartment with cracked walls, worn-out furniture, and a refrigerator that was almost always empty. Every month felt exactly the same. He worked long hours at a small warehouse loading heavy boxes onto delivery trucks, earned just enough to pay his rent and buy basic groceries, then waited for the next paycheck to repeat the same routine. Most of his coworkers constantly complained about their lives, blaming the government, their families' bad luck, or wealthy people for their problems. Jason listened quietly but rarely joined those conversations. Deep inside, he believed there had to be another way to live. Every evening after work, instead of spending hours scrolling through social media or watching television, he walked to the public library carrying an old backpack filled with notebooks. There he read books about successful entrepreneurs, investing, personal finance, negotiation, leadership, psychology, and business strategy. He couldn't afford expensive courses, so books became his teachers. While others spent money on entertainment, Jason invested every free hour into learning. His apartment walls slowly filled with handwritten notes containing business ideas, motivational quotes, financial plans, and daily goals. Above his desk, he taped a simple sentence written in black marker: "Your future is created by today's decisions." Every morning before leaving for work, he read those words aloud. His friends laughed whenever they visited his apartment. They called him obsessed. They joked that books would never make him rich. Jason never argued because he understood something they didn't. Changing his financial future would first require changing the way he thought. One rainy Monday morning, the warehouse manager gathered every employee together. The company had lost several important contracts, and business had declined dramatically. With a disappointed expression, the manager announced that the warehouse would close permanently within 2 weeks. Silence filled the room. Some employees became angry. Others looked terrified. Jason stood still, holding his work gloves in one hand. He felt fear rising inside him, but another feeling quickly replaced it: opportunity. That evening, he returned home carrying the last paycheck he would receive from the company. He sat alone in the darkness for hours without turning on the lights. His savings account contained less than $3,000. Most people would immediately search for another similar job, but Jason asked himself a different question. If he simply replaced one warehouse job with another, what would his life look like 5 years later? The answer frightened him. Nothing would change. He would still be exhausted, underpaid, and dependent on someone else's decisions. For the first time in his life, he realized that job security was often an illusion. His income depended on a company he didn't control. His future depended on decisions made by strangers. That night, he opened a fresh notebook and wrote a single sentence across the first page. "Today I stop working only for money. Today I start building wealth." It wasn't a promise to become rich overnight. It was a promise to become the kind of person capable of creating value. The next morning, Jason sold almost everything he didn't truly need. His television disappeared first. Then his gaming console, expensive headphones, decorative furniture, and even the bicycle he rarely used. Friends thought he had gone crazy. One of them asked why he was selling everything instead of relaxing while looking for another job. Jason smiled and answered, "I'm not selling my belongings because I'm giving up. I'm selling distractions because I'm just getting started." With the extra money, he created a small emergency fund and another account labeled business capital. From that moment forward, every dollar had a purpose. He stopped buying coffee from cafes, cooked every meal at home, walked whenever possible instead of paying for transportation, and carefully recorded every expense inside a notebook. Rather than feeling deprived, Jason felt free. Every unnecessary purchase he avoided brought him one step closer to his dream. He accepted temporary work delivering packages during the day, cleaning offices at night, and helping construction workers on weekends. The jobs were exhausting, but unlike before, he no longer saw them as permanent. They were simply tools helping him finance a better future. Every evening after work, no matter how tired he felt, he spent 3 hours studying business and writing ideas. Some nights he fell asleep over his notebook, waking up with ink on his face and pages filled with unfinished thoughts. Instead of becoming discouraged, he smiled because each difficult day proved he was paying the price required for change. Slowly, something unexpected happened. His confidence grew stronger than his fear. He stopped seeing successful people as lucky individuals and started seeing them as ordinary people who had developed extraordinary habits. That realization changed everything. Instead of asking, "Why are they successful?" he began asking, "What do they do every day that I don't?" The answers were surprisingly simple. They solved problems. They kept learning. They managed money wisely. They built relationships. Most importantly, they stayed consistent when others quit. Jason decided those habits would become his new lifestyle, no matter how long success took to arrive. Jason refused to rush into starting a business simply because he wanted to become rich. He knew that thousands of people failed every year because they invested in ideas without understanding the problems they were trying to solve. Instead of chasing trends, he spent weeks observing people. Every delivery he made became an opportunity to learn. Every conversation with a store owner, restaurant manager, mechanic, or office employee became a lesson. He carried a small notebook everywhere he went, writing down complaints he heard repeatedly. Some businesses struggled with keeping track of inventory. Others wasted hours organizing customer information. Many owners admitted they were too busy working inside their businesses to improve them. Jason noticed something that completely changed his perspective. Money always flowed toward people who solved expensive problems. One afternoon, while delivering office supplies to a small furniture company, he watched 2 employees spend nearly an hour searching for missing inventory records because everything was written on paper. The owner looked frustrated and said, "If someone could build a simple system that saves us time without costing a fortune, I'd buy it immediately." Jason didn't forget those words. That evening he returned to the library and spent hours researching inventory software. Most programs were designed for large corporations and were far too expensive or complicated for small businesses. He suddenly realized he had found a real opportunity. Instead of trying to compete with giant technology companies, he could serve small business owners who were being ignored. Excited but cautious, Jason resisted the temptation to quit his temporary jobs. He continued saving money while teaching himself basic programming through free online resources and books borrowed from the library. Every day followed the same routine. Wake up before sunrise, exercise, read for an hour, work during the day, study at night, sleep for 5 hours, then repeat everything again. Weeks became months, and months slowly transformed into almost a year. Many people around him believed nothing had changed because Jason still lived in the same apartment and wore inexpensive clothes. They couldn't see what was happening inside his mind. Every book he finished, every skill he learned, and every disciplined decision he made was quietly preparing him for opportunities that hadn't arrived yet. Whenever discouragement appeared, he looked at the sentence hanging above his desk. "Your future is created by today's decisions." Reminded him that success was rarely visible in the beginning. Most progress happened long before anyone else noticed. One Saturday afternoon, Jason attended a free entrepreneurship seminar held at a local community center. The room was filled with aspiring business owners, college students, and experienced entrepreneurs sharing their journeys. During a short break, Jason introduced himself to an older gentleman named Robert Hayes, a retired businessman who had built and sold several successful companies. Unlike everyone else, Robert wasn't interested in hearing how much money Jason had or what qualifications he possessed. Instead, he asked a simple question: "What problem are you trying to solve?" Jason spent nearly 15 minutes explaining everything he had discovered while visiting small businesses. Robert listened carefully before smiling and saying, "You're thinking like an entrepreneur already. Most people ask how to make money. Very few ask how to create value." Those words stayed with Jason long after the seminar ended. Over the following months, Robert became an informal mentor. They met every Saturday morning at a quiet coffee shop where Jason brought notebooks full of questions. Robert never offered him money or promised shortcuts. Instead, he challenged Jason's thinking. Whenever Jason described an idea, Robert would ask, "Why would someone pay for this? What makes your solution different? Have you tested it with real customers?" At first, Jason found those questions frustrating because he didn't always know the answers. Eventually, he understood that asking better questions led to better decisions. Following Robert's advice, Jason created a rough prototype of a simple inventory management system. It wasn't beautiful. The design looked outdated, and several features were incomplete. Still, it worked well enough to solve the basic problems he had observed. Nervously, he visited 10 local businesses and offered them a free trial. 9 owners politely rejected him without giving the software a chance. One owner laughed and said, "Why would I trust software built by someone working delivery jobs?" Jason thanked him for his honesty and left without arguing. The rejection hurt, but instead of feeling embarrassed, he viewed every refusal as feedback. Each no helped him improve his presentation, simplify his explanation, and better understand what customers actually wanted. Rather than seeing rejection as failure, he began seeing it as education. Finally, a small family-owned hardware store agreed to test Jason's software for 1 month. The owner, Mr. Thompson, admitted he couldn't afford expensive business systems, but was willing to try something new if it saved time. Jason personally installed the program, trained the employees, and remained available every evening to fix bugs or answer questions. During the first week, several problems appeared. Reports contained errors, inventory numbers didn't always match, and the program occasionally crashed. Instead of making excuses, Jason worked through the night correcting every mistake. He often slept only 3 or 4 hours before returning to his delivery job the next morning. By the end of the month, the software had become much more reliable. Inventory mistakes dropped significantly, employees completed tasks faster, and Mr. Thompson estimated the business saved dozens of working hours. At the end of the trial, he handed Jason his first payment. The amount wasn't life-changing, but Jason stared at the check with pride because it represented something completely different from every paycheck he had earned before. For the first time, someone had paid him for creating value instead of simply trading time for money. That evening, he placed the check inside his notebook rather than cashing it immediately. He wanted to remember that moment forever. It wasn't about the amount written on the paper. It was proof that his dream was becoming real. Before going to bed, he looked once more at the sentence above his desk. Then he smiled and quietly whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." Jason woke up the next morning with more confidence than he had ever felt before, but he refused to let his first paying customer convince him that success had already arrived. He understood that many businesses fail immediately after their first victory, because their owners become comfortable instead of becoming better. He cashed the check from Mr. Thompson and invested almost every dollar back into improving his software. He purchased a better laptop, subscribed to a reliable cloud hosting service, and hired a freelance designer to create a cleaner and more professional interface. Every remaining dollar stayed inside his business account because he had promised himself never to spend business money on personal luxuries. While many people celebrated their first success by buying expensive clothes or the newest phone, Jason celebrated by buying books, software tools, and online courses. He continued working temporary jobs because his business income was still unpredictable. But something had changed inside him. Every difficult shift felt easier because he finally knew why he was working so hard. Every package he delivered reminded him that one day he wanted to own a company that created opportunities for others instead of depending on someone else's paycheck. During the following months, he visited more than 100 small businesses across the city. Some owners ignored him before he finished introducing himself. Others politely accepted his business card without ever calling back. A few agreed to test the software, only to stop using it after a week because they were uncomfortable changing their old habits. Each rejection tested his patience, but Jason never allowed disappointment to last more than one evening. Every night he reviewed his mistakes, adjusted his presentation, improved the software, and prepared for another day. Slowly, customer by customer, his reputation began to spread. The owners who actually used his system recommended it to neighboring businesses, explaining how much time and money they had saved. Word of mouth became his most valuable form of advertising, because satisfied customers trusted other business owners more than advertisements. Jason soon realized that creating an excellent product was only half of the journey. Building trust was equally important, and trust could never be bought. It had to be earned through honesty, consistency, and keeping every promise, even the smallest one. As Jason's customer list continued growing, he reached a point where handling everything alone became impossible. During the day, he answered customer emails, fixed technical issues, visited potential clients, updated the software, managed invoices, and still worked temporary jobs to support himself. Most nights he fell asleep sitting at his desk before finishing his work. His mentor Robert noticed the exhaustion in Jason's face during one of their weekly meetings and smiled knowingly. "You're trying to grow a company with the mindset of an employee," Robert said. Jason looked confused. Robert continued, Employees try to do everything themselves. Entrepreneurs build systems and trust people. Those words stayed in Jason's mind for days. Hiring someone felt terrifying because it meant spending money he had worked so hard to save. However, he also understood that refusing to grow out of fear would eventually destroy everything he had built. After careful planning, he hired his very first employee, a young software developer named Emma, who had recently graduated from college and was searching for an opportunity to prove herself. Jason couldn't offer a large salary, but he offered something many companies couldn't: respect, flexibility, and the chance to help build something meaningful from the ground up. Emma quickly became an important part of the business. While she focused on improving the software, Jason concentrated on speaking with customers and expanding the company. Within a few months, customer satisfaction increased dramatically because technical problems were solved much faster. Jason also began recording every process inside the business, creating guides that explained exactly how different tasks should be completed. He wanted the company to depend on systems rather than depending entirely on him. For the first time, he could imagine the business growing beyond one person's abilities. Just as everything finally seemed to be moving in the right direction, Jason faced his biggest challenge since deciding to start from nothing. A large technology company launched a new inventory management platform specifically targeting small businesses. Their marketing budget was enormous, their advertisements appeared everywhere, and they offered huge discounts to attract customers. Within weeks, several of Jason's clients canceled their subscriptions to try the cheaper alternative. His monthly income dropped sharply, and fear quietly returned. Emma suggested lowering prices even further, but Jason knew competing only on price would eventually destroy the business. Instead, he asked every remaining customer the same question: what is the one thing you wish software companies understood about your business? Their answers revealed something powerful. Customers weren't leaving because Jason's product was worse. They were leaving because the larger company promised more features. But the businesses that stayed praised Jason for something far more valuable: personal service. Whenever they had a problem, Jason answered the phone himself. Whenever they needed a new feature, he listened carefully instead of treating them like account numbers. That realization changed his strategy completely. Rather than trying to become the biggest company, Jason decided to become the company that cared the most. He introduced faster customer support, personalized training sessions, and regular meetings where business owners could suggest improvements directly. Little by little, former customers began returning after discovering that cheaper software couldn't replace genuine relationships. Jason smiled as he welcomed every returning customer, without criticizing their previous decision. He knew that trust, once earned honestly, often became stronger than any advertisement. Standing alone in his small office one evening, he looked around at the company that had started with nothing more than a notebook, a dream, and an unwavering decision to keep moving forward, realizing that the greatest investment he had ever made was not money, but the choice to believe in himself when nobody else did. Jason's company entered its third year with steady momentum, but he knew that maintaining success was often harder than achieving it. Every morning he arrived at the office before anyone else, reviewed customer feedback, studied market trends, and wrote down 3 improvements the company could make before the day ended. His team had grown from 2 people to 15, and every new employee joined for the same reason. They believed in Jason's vision of building a company that genuinely helped small businesses instead of treating them like numbers. The office itself remained modest. There were no luxurious chairs, expensive decorations, or flashy conference rooms. Jason believed every unnecessary dollar should either improve the product or strengthen the team. Whenever investors visited, they were surprised to see the founder sitting beside his employees instead of inside a private office. Jason answered customer support calls whenever the team became busy, celebrated every new client with genuine excitement, and never asked anyone to do work he wasn't willing to do himself. His leadership created a culture of trust that slowly became one of the company's greatest strengths. Customers noticed how quickly problems were solved, employees enjoyed coming to work, and referrals increased month after month. Revenue doubled, then doubled again, allowing Jason to finally stop working temporary jobs for the first time since beginning his journey. On the evening he officially resigned from his last delivery job, he walked home through the same streets where he had once delivered packages in the rain, carrying nothing except gratitude. He realized that every difficult day, every rejection, every sleepless night, and every sacrifice had prepared him for this moment. Instead of celebrating with expensive purchases, he quietly visited the public library where his dream had truly begun. Sitting at the same wooden table where he had spent hundreds of evenings studying, he smiled and whispered, "Thank you," knowing that success had started long before his company earned its first dollar. As the months passed, new opportunities appeared almost every week. Business magazines began writing about the young entrepreneur who had built a successful software company from almost nothing. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived regularly, and universities asked him to share his story with students. Yet Jason remained careful. He had seen too many entrepreneurs become distracted by fame while forgetting to improve their businesses. Every interview ended with the same advice: don't chase money, chase value. If you consistently solve meaningful problems, money eventually follows. Those simple words spread across social media, inspiring thousands of young people to focus on creating solutions instead of looking for shortcuts. Success, however, attracted attention from people who had never believed in him before. Investors suddenly wanted to become partners. Large corporations proposed buying his company. Former classmates who had ignored him now contacted him asking for jobs or financial help. Even friends who had once laughed at his dream apologized for doubting him. Jason welcomed everyone politely but remained cautious. Robert had once told him, "Success changes the people around you far more than it changes you." Jason finally understood what his mentor had meant. One afternoon, a major technology corporation offered to purchase his company for $50 million. The amount was far beyond anything Jason had ever imagined earning in his lifetime. His employees encouraged him to consider the offer, believing it would guarantee financial security forever. For several nights, Jason couldn't sleep. $50 million would allow him to retire before turning 35. He could travel the world, buy any house he wanted, and never worry about money again. Yet something inside him refused to accept the offer. During a long walk through the city, he asked himself one important question: if I sell today, will I still be building the life I dreamed about, or will I simply be buying comfort? The answer became clear. His dream had never been to become rich as quickly as possible. His dream had always been to build something meaningful that lasted for generations. The next morning, he respectfully declined the offer. Many people called him crazy for rejecting such an enormous amount of money, but Jason felt strangely peaceful. Instead of selling his future, he decided to expand it. He invested heavily in research, hired talented engineers, and develop new products designed to help even more small businesses grow. His decision proved correct. Within 2 years, the company's value exceeded the amount he had refused. But more importantly, thousands of entrepreneurs now relied on his products every day. Robert smiled proudly after hearing the news. "You passed the test," he said. Jason looked confused. Robert laughed softly. "Money tests character just as much as poverty does." Despite the company's rapid growth, Jason never forgot the difficult years that shaped him. Every Friday afternoon, he personally interviewed young applicants who had little experience but showed determination and a willingness to learn. He remembered how many employers had rejected him simply because he lacked qualifications, so he created opportunities for people who reminded him of his younger self. One such applicant was a 19-year-old named Daniel, who arrived wearing borrowed clothes and admitted he had never worked in the technology industry. Instead of asking about experience, Jason asked, "Tell me about the hardest challenge you've overcome." Daniel spoke honestly about supporting his family after his father became seriously ill. Jason recognized the same determination he had once seen in the mirror years earlier and offered him a position. Stories like Daniel's became common throughout the company. Employees weren't hired only because of impressive resumes. They were hired because they demonstrated integrity, curiosity, and perseverance. This approach created an incredibly loyal team that treated the company like a shared mission, rather than just another workplace. Meanwhile, Jason quietly launched a scholarship program for students who couldn't afford business or technology education. Few people knew he personally funded most of it because he disliked public attention for charitable work. He believed generosity should solve problems rather than create headlines. Every time he visited schools to meet scholarship recipients, he repeated the same message. Your circumstances may influence where you begin, but they never decide where you finish. Watching young people gain opportunities reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. Wealth no longer represented freedom for himself alone. It represented the ability to create opportunities for thousands of others who simply needed someone to believe in them. Standing in front of his growing team during the company's annual meeting, Jason looked around the room filled with smiling faces and realized that his greatest achievement wasn't the money he had earned or the company he had built. It was proving that a person who starts with almost nothing can create extraordinary success through discipline, honesty, relentless learning, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when nobody else believes the dream is possible. Jason's company continued expanding beyond anything he had imagined during those lonely nights in his tiny apartment. Offices opened in new cities, thousands of businesses subscribed to his software, and his team grew into hundreds of talented people working toward the same mission. Financial magazines placed him on their covers, business podcasts invited him as a guest, and universities studied his company as an example of sustainable growth. Yet the more successful he became, the more carefully he protected the habits that had built his life. He still woke up before sunrise, exercised every morning, read at least 1 hour every day, and wrote his goals by hand instead of relying on memory. Success had changed his bank account, but it had not changed his discipline. One afternoon, while driving to a meeting, Jason passed the old warehouse where he had once loaded heavy boxes for long hours. The building had been abandoned for years, with broken windows and rusted gates slowly disappearing beneath weeds. He parked his car across the street and remained there for several minutes, remembering the exhausted young man who had once believed life would never change. Instead of feeling proud of how far he had come, He felt grateful for every difficult experience that had shaped his character. Without those struggles, he might never have learned patience, resilience, humility, or the value of consistent effort. As he drove away, an idea formed in his mind. He decided to purchase the abandoned warehouse, not to expand his business, but to transform it into a free entrepreneurship and technology training center for young people who came from low-income families. Construction began only a few months later. Classrooms replaced storage areas, modern computers replaced broken machinery, and the same building that had once represented limitation became a place filled with opportunity. Hundreds of students enrolled during the first year alone. Many had never imagined they could learn programming, business planning, marketing, or financial management without paying expensive tuition. Jason personally taught one class every month, always beginning with the same sentence. I am not standing in front of you because I was lucky. I am standing here because I refused to quit when life became difficult. As the training center grew, so did the number of success stories. One student started an online design business from her bedroom and eventually hired 10 employees. Another developed a mobile application that helped local farmers manage crop production more efficiently. Several graduates launched small companies together after meeting inside Jason's classrooms. Watching these young entrepreneurs succeed brought Jason a level of happiness that no financial milestone had ever matched. During interviews, journalists often asked him what it felt like to become one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the country. Jason always smiled before answering, "Money is a tool. It can make life more comfortable, but it cannot replace purpose. The greatest investment I have ever made was investing in people." His answer surprised many reporters because they expected stories about luxury homes, sports cars, or expensive vacations. The truth was far simpler. Although Jason could afford almost anything he wanted, he lived in a comfortable but modest house, drove a reliable car, and avoided unnecessary displays of wealth. Instead, most of his fortune returned to projects that created opportunities for others. His company established scholarship programs, funded libraries, supported startup competitions, and partnered with schools to teach financial literacy to teenagers. Jason believed every young person deserved access to knowledge regardless of their financial background. Education, he often said, is the only investment that continues paying dividends for an entire lifetime. His words spread across social media, inspiring millions of people to rethink their relationship with money. Instead of asking how to become rich quickly, many began asking how to become valuable enough that success naturally followed. Jason considered that change in mindset one of his greatest achievements. One evening, after delivering a keynote speech at an international business conference, Jason walked alone through a quiet city park. The audience had applauded for several minutes, praising his accomplishments and calling him an inspiration. Yet as he sat on a wooden bench watching families enjoy the evening together, he reflected on everything that had happened since losing his warehouse job years earlier. He realized that every turning point in his life had begun with a difficult moment. Losing his job had forced him to rethink his future. Rejection had improved his communication skills. Financial hardship had taught him discipline. Competition had pushed him to innovate. Failure had become his greatest teacher. If life had been easy from the beginning, he might never have discovered his potential. That realization changed the way he spoke about success forever. From that day forward, he stopped telling people to avoid failure. Instead, he encouraged them to prepare for it, learn from it, and keep moving despite it. During one speech, a young student asked him, If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? Jason smiled gently before replying. Stop worrying about how long success will take. Focus on becoming the person who deserves it. The audience remained silent for several seconds before erupting into applause. Those words quickly became one of the most widely shared quotes from his speeches, because they reminded people that lasting success begins with personal growth rather than financial gain. As the years passed, Jason's company continued breaking records, but his proudest moments never appeared in business magazines or financial reports. They appeared in handwritten letters from former students thanking him for believing in them, in photographs of families whose lives had improved because of new opportunities, and in stories of young entrepreneurs who had once felt hopeless before discovering a new path through education and perseverance. On the 20th anniversary of founding his company, Jason gathered every employee, mentor, scholarship recipient, and training center graduate for a special celebration. Standing on stage before thousands of people whose lives had become connected through one decision made many years earlier, he looked around with tears in his eyes. He remembered the tiny apartment, the empty refrigerator, the endless delivery routes, the library books, the notebook filled with dreams, and the promise he had made to himself after losing his job. Taking a deep breath, he smiled and said, "People often ask me how I built my fortune from nothing. The truth is, I didn't start with nothing. I started with hope, discipline, curiosity, and the willingness to work harder than my circumstances. Those things were worth more than money because they allowed me to earn everything else." Never underestimate the power of small decisions repeated every single day. They may seem invisible in the beginning, but one day they become the story people call success. The entire audience rose to their feet in applause, not because they had witnessed the story of a wealthy businessman, but because they had witnessed the journey of an ordinary young man who proved that true wealth is built one disciplined decision at a time, and that the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind is not the money they accumulate, but the lives they inspire and the opportunities they create for others. 25 years after writing the words, "Today I start building wealth," in a simple notebook, Jason stood on the stage of the Global Innovation Summit before thousands of entrepreneurs, students, and business leaders from around the world. The applause lasted for several minutes, but as he looked across the audience, he wasn't thinking about awards, recognition, or the billions his company was now worth. His mind traveled back to the small apartment with cracked walls, the public library where he had spent countless evenings studying, the delivery jobs that left him exhausted, and the notebook that contained nothing more than dreams and determination. The host introduced him as one of the most influential entrepreneurs of his generation, yet Jason believed his greatest achievement had nothing to do with money. When the applause finally faded, he smiled and began speaking. "People often ask me what the secret to becoming wealthy is. They expect me to reveal a special investment strategy or a shortcut that changed everything. The truth is much simpler. I became successful because I stopped looking for shortcuts and started building habits. Every successful day was built on hundreds of ordinary days when nobody was watching, nobody was applauding, and nobody believed I would succeed." The audience listened in complete silence as he continued sharing stories about rejection, failure, discipline, and persistence. At the end of his speech, he surprised everyone by announcing a new project. He pledged a significant portion of his personal fortune to create hundreds of entrepreneurship centers across different countries, giving young people free access to business education, technology, mentorship, and financial literacy. He explained that talent exists everywhere, but opportunities do not. If someone had given him free guidance when he was struggling, his journey might have been shorter. Now he wanted to become that opportunity for millions of others. News of his announcement spread around the world within hours, inspiring governments, companies, and philanthropists to support similar programs. Jason had reached a point where his influence extended far beyond business. He was helping shape the future of countless people he would never personally meet. Several months later, Jason decided to take a short vacation for the first time in many years. Instead of choosing an expensive private island or luxury resort, he quietly returned to the small neighborhood where he had grown up. Many buildings had changed, but some streets looked exactly as they had decades earlier. He walked slowly past the old grocery store where he had once shopped with carefully counted coins, the apartment building where he had spent lonely nights planning a future nobody else could see, and finally the public library that had become his second home. The librarian, now much older, immediately recognized him. She smiled warmly and said, "I always knew you would do something extraordinary. You checked out more books than anyone I've ever met." Jason laughed softly before donating enough money to renovate the entire library, expand its collection, and provide free digital learning resources for future generations. Before leaving, he quietly walked to the same desk where he had written his first business plans. Running his hand across the wooden surface, he whispered, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even know how to believe in myself." As he stepped outside, he noticed a young man sitting on the library steps reading a business book with worn pages. The sight reminded Jason of himself years earlier. Instead of introducing himself, he simply sat beside the young man and asked, "What are you reading?" They spent nearly an hour discussing goals, fears, and dreams. Before leaving, Jason handed him the notebook he always carried and said, "Write your future before life writes it for you." The young man thanked him without realizing who he had been talking to. Jason smiled as he walked away, knowing that sometimes a single conversation can change the direction of an entire life. Years continued to pass, but Jason never slowed down. His company remained successful because it continued focusing on solving real problems instead of chasing quick profits. The entrepreneurship centers he founded produced thousands of successful business owners, many of whom returned years later to mentor the next generation. A culture of generosity began spreading through the community he had built. People who succeeded didn't simply celebrate their own achievements. They reached back to help someone else climb. Jason believed this chain of encouragement was more valuable than any business strategy because it multiplied opportunities instead of limiting them. On his 60th birthday, his employees organized a surprise celebration attended by former coworkers, mentors, students, scholarship recipients, and entrepreneurs whose lives had been transformed by his work. One by one, they shared stories of how a scholarship, a training program, a conversation, or a simple piece of advice from Jason had changed everything for them. Listening quietly from the front row, Jason realized that the true measure of wealth was not the size of his company or the balance of his bank account. It was the number of lives that had become brighter because he chose not to give up all those years ago. When he was finally invited onto the stage, he looked around the room with tears in his eyes and said, "If there is one lesson I hope every person remembers after hearing my story, it is this. Your starting point does not determine your destination. Your habits do. Your attitude does. Your willingness to keep learning does. Success is never built in a single day. It is built one decision, one sacrifice, one lesson, and one act of courage at a time." Many years later, after Jason retired from leading the company, his story was taught in schools, business programs, and leadership seminars around the world. Students no longer studied him simply because he had become wealthy. They studied him because he proved that integrity, discipline, humility, and perseverance could build a life far more meaningful than money alone. His autobiography ended with the same sentence he had written in his notebook decades earlier. "Your future is created by today's decisions." Those words inspired millions to stop waiting for perfect circumstances and start taking responsibility for the life they wanted to build. Some readers launched businesses. Others returned to school, learned new skills, repaired broken relationships, or found the courage to pursue dreams they had postponed for years. Jason's greatest success was never the fortune he accumulated. It was the hope he awakened in ordinary people who finally believed that they, too, could change their future. And so his journey, which had begun in a tiny apartment with an empty refrigerator and a head full of impossible dreams, became living proof that wealth is not born from luck or privilege, but from consistent effort, lifelong learning, honest work, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the path ahead is uncertain. His legacy lived on through every person who chose action over excuses, discipline over comfort, and purpose over fear, proving that the most valuable fortune anyone can ever build is a life that inspires others to believe in themselves.